together on Teams. I'm going to be sharing slides throughout this presentation, but during our call today, please stay on mute if at all possible, unless it's time for our Q&A. And then you can go ahead and share at that point if you'd like. You're also able to use the chat at any point. And so to stay on mute, there's the little microphone button. It's often at the top. You can do that. You can keep your camera on, keep your camera off, whatever your personal and internet bandwidth for today, you've got that. And I see that we're troubleshooting a little bit of audio here coming through in the chat. So let's get that figured out. Is the echo gone for whoever had identified it for us? Okay. Great, thank you. Well, we are recording today's session for folks who couldn't attend live, and we'll go ahead and get started. So if we haven't had the chance to cross paths yet, hello, my name is Lauren Pyle. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Outdoor Recreation Grants Manager for the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. So we are glad you're here today for the introductory webinar about the Recreational Trails Program. And I am joined today by Claire Polfus, who is also on our team at FPR, who will be presenting a little bit during the session, but also helping to troubleshoot any technology, respond to the chat, and help out from there. So you'll hear from Claire as well. And so with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And so today's session is really an introduction to the Recreational Trails Program, or RTP program. And so what we're going to cover today is we're going to share a bit about the program itself, touch on the timeline, eligibility, both for applicants as well as for projects. We'll talk about some tips and tricks, some advice for completing the pre-application, touch on compliance requirements, share some additional resources, and then open it up for some Q&A. And so additional information about most of what we're going to be able to cover is also available in the RTP Project Development and Pre-Application Guidance document, which is available on our website. So we'll drop the link in later. And so to get us started today about the RTP program, the Recreational Trails Program. So if you haven't heard about this program before, RTP is funded by the U.S. Federal Highway Administration. And so it has been a longstanding program here in Vermont. And in just the last 15 years has funded just under $8.5 million through competitive grants for trails programs. And this year in 2024, we have almost $500,000 that we're going to be able to be awarding. And so the RTP grant is, first and foremost, it is a reimbursement grant that does require a 20% match. And so that's 20% of the project total. And so I think from here, I'm going to click to the next slide and turn it over to Claire, because on this webinar, we have a mix of folks, based on what you clicked when you registered, who have either received an RTP grant before or who have applied before, and a lot of folks who are new to the RTP program. And so Claire, if you want to touch on a little bit more about the evolution of this program.
Great, thanks. As Lauren mentioned, RTP has been a critical source of funding for trails projects in Vermont for over 20 years. And so we have a long history with this program. And as the requirements from the federal government have evolved, the program has needed, from the Vermont side of the program has needed to evolve as well. Many of you probably who have applied before knew Sherry Winnie, who retired last summer, and it just so happened that we were in the middle of reviewing the program and making recommendations for the next steps for the program right when Sherry announced her retirement. So it was actually a really good opportunity to kind of get Sherry's grounding on all of her experience with the program, and then with Lauren coming on, taking those steps that she recommended, as well as a group that was put together by the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council, which is the advisory group for this program, put together last summer and going into this next year. So the vision of the program, as well as some of the recommended changes, we can highlight, and some of you will probably recognize some of the changes that we have going forward with this program. Great, thanks. I was just going to ask for in the next slide. So we did align on the vision for RTP. We want RTP to be fair and equitable for all trails organizations in Vermont. We recognize that there are, large professional trail organizations that get RTP grants, and there's small municipal all volunteer boards who get RTP grants, and we want to make it possible for everyone to be able to access this funding. We also want to make sure that the funding that we give out goes towards projects that utilize really high quality design and construction practices, so that we're protecting the environment as well as the experience of the users and the investment of public dollars into trail projects across Vermont. Obviously, we have to fulfill all of our obligations to Federal Highway, but we also know that sometimes those obligations are difficult, and we want to make sure that we can support everyone through a straightforward and transparent process. And finally, as I mentioned, the Vermont Trails and Greenways Council is statutorily obligated to advise us on this program. And so we have set up a system of review every 5 years. And then we also work regularly with the board of the council on any changes to the program.
Thanks, Claire. Well, and as Claire mentioned, this group made a lot of recommendations over the past really year, doing one of those deep reviews. And so throughout the presentation today, I'm going to try to call out some of the really the big shifts from previous years that you'll see in part due to their feedback. And so to get us started thinking about the grant itself, step up one is timeline. And so we are in the middle of our pre-application phase for the RTP program. And so that opened November 20th and is open through December 30th of this year. Then in early January, folks who submitted their pre-application who are invited to submit a full application will be notified sometime by mid-January. Full applications are due February 11th. Of this upcoming year. And then from that mid-February point through May, we'll be doing grant review and then grant agreement development. And that's at the end of that grant review phase is when the folks who've been selected will be notified of that stage. We'll shift into our grant agreement development, which is going to be happening from May to September of this upcoming year. And then projects can begin October 1st is the date we're planning on. October 1st of 2024 and going through December 31st of 2026. And so this actually provides 2 complete field seasons for the project. And one of the recommendations that came out of the RTP working group is that we generally plan for the first season to be planning and permitting, to go through any final steps to make sure that everything is ready. And then that second field season is really the time that we focus on a lot of implementation. So you might be thinking to yourself, why so long? Particularly when we get to that grant agreement phase and the grant, the grant review. And so you don't have to read all the bubbles. But this is to show you what is happening. It's kind of peeling back the curtain. What is happening behind the scenes that takes so long for some of those pieces? And so during the grant application and review process, that requires multiple steps. It includes scoring and review by a ranking committee. We have FPR agency approval. And then we actually have to submit the grants that we're recommending to the U.S. Federal Highway Administration for authorization. And then when we get to the grant agreement development phase, there's several compliance reviews that are a part of that process. So Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, National Environmental Policy Act, Endangered Species Act, state risk assessments, things like that. And so depending on the complexity of the project, the results of the compliance reports, as well as the responsiveness of the grantees, all of that's going to shape where within that May to September line, how quickly grant agreements are completed. And so this is just to show you that like we always are working as quickly as possible. But if you're wondering why that extended timeline between when you might start to find out to when to do the work, it's because all of this is happening in the middle. And so to kind of zoom back and stepify, I mentioned that we have this phase and we're starting with a pre-application. And that was another recommendation from the RTP working group. And that's really where we are right now and what we're going to focus on for the rest of this webinar. So to submit a pre-application to the RTP program, you have to be an eligible applicant. Eligible applicants for this program include municipalities, nonprofits, and governmental entities. So that includes state, regional, federal. It can also include tribal entities and other governmental entities. So you have to be an eligible applicant. If you are not one of these groups, you can potentially be a partner on a grant or a, something like that. If you are a for-profit business, there would be some contracting pieces to go through that you couldn't automatically be a partner that's included, but it doesn't preclude you from ultimately participating in an RTP project. But these are the applicant types. And what can you do as an applicant? Well, you have to have a trail, and it has to do with focused on either motorized or unmotorized use. And so the Federal Highways Administration actually has a designated allocation for that all states have to comply with. And that's that of our total pot of funding, 30% of it has to go to supporting motorized projects. 30% has to go to non-motorized projects. And 40% are mixed use. And mixed use is any combination of two or more types of activities. So that could be things like mountain biking and walking. It could be things like ATV and walking. So it can be a mix of, e-bikes and mountain bikes. So it can be a mix of activities there, any type of two activities. And for this grant round, if you are a non-motorized trail project, the maximum that you can apply for is $50,000. This is an increase over last year. So last year's cap was only $30,000. So this year you can have a $50,000 max ask. If you are a non-motorized project, if it is a motorized project, there is no maximum. And so you might be thinking, well, what are the types of things I can do with my trail? We've kind of put them into these few big buckets. The first one is maintenance or restoration of existing trails. That is what you can do as one of the main things you can apply for. You can build new trails. You can add amenities to your trails, trailside or trailhead features. And so these amenities can include things like signage, kiosks, composting toilets, recycling receptacles, or other structures along the trail. RTP grants allow for land acquisition for trails, including trail easements, and a small portion of RTP funds can be used to support educational projects. And so something to note beyond just this straight eligibility, this year the review committee is going to be considering a few key priorities during the selection process. So organizations that did not receive an RTP grant in 2023 are going to be given preference over the most recent round of grantees, except in special circumstances. Projects that include remedying deferred maintenance or trail rehabilitation are going to be given preference over new trail construction or creation of improvements. And RTP projects are going to be intentionally selected to support both geographic diversity across the state, as well as the diversity of trail uses. And so saying all that, I want to acknowledge that the photos in this slide and the next don't fully show the breadth of eligible RTP activities. So we've got a selection of photos I've used on these slides that are actually from RTP grantees. If you can see in that fine print, they're actually from previous grantees. So they're authentic photos from projects that have been funded by this grant in recent years. And as I mentioned, there's the motorized and non-motorized categories. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what falls into that? And so RTP the RTP program defines recreational trails as any kind of thoroughfare or track across land or snow used for recreational purposes. So this slide shows examples, but is far from a universally complete list. So funds can be awarded for a wide range of activities and opportunities that happen a lot across trails, and multiple trail uses in a single project are encouraged. What's not eligible? That's one of the things we've been hearing over the couple of years of like, well, can I do this? And so what we've done is we've prepped a list of things that you can't do. You can't use RTP funds to condemn any property, or which would fall under like eminent domain, right? You can't use RTP funds to promote motorized use on designated non-motorized lands. You can't build a trail on land where it's prohibited to build a trail, or land where you don't have landowner permission to build a trail. You can't use RTP funds to support sidewalks, road improvements, or other transportation type focused improvement. Things like bike lanes don't fall into that RTP program at the national level. You can't use RTP funds in Vermont for picnic tables, campgrounds, or play equipment. So all of those are not eligible. You can't use it for exclusively feasibility studies or standalone planning. You can do planning in conjunction with the implementation, but you can't just do a planning grant with the RTP funds. You can't use RTP funds for promotion or advertising, law enforcement, general land acquisition, or fundraising. So for some of these pieces, we have alternate programs the FPR administers that might be a better fit. I know many of you here on the call today are probably familiar with the VORAC community grant programs, which would fund some of these activities. We're also in the process of putting together the details for a round of land and water conservation fund grants in 2024 that could fund other things that maybe aren't a fit for the VORAC grant. So we're hoping that between these three grants, we can help support most of your outdoor recreation needs here in Vermont. And so now that you kind of maybe got your project plan in mind, how do you submit a pre-application? Well, you have until 11:59 p.m. on December 30th to do so. And it is a simple two-step process. First is that there is an online form. The link is on the website, and it is a fillable form that is the nuts and bolts details you need to know. Things like your name, your email, how much money do you need? Where is your project happening? It's a quick form that's filling out a lot of those details. And then after you have submitted that form, this is when you're going to give us the meat of the pre-application. We're asking for 3 sets of documents. One is the RTP work plan. There is a template available on our website. We're going to touch on that in a bit. The budget, again, we have a template for you, and your completed permit navigator results. And so I'm going to go through all of those things in a lot more detail in terms of what you need to know. But that's what you need to do, is you need to submit the online form, and you need to submit those 3 documents by email by 11:59 on December 30th of this year. Applications that we don't have all of those pieces, all 4 of those by that deadline, are going to be considered incomplete and will not be eligible for review. When we get those applications, or those pre-applications, excuse me, on December 30th, right after the new year, one is what we're going to be checking for are 4 major components. And so this first review is being done by the FPR staff team. We're looking for eligibility. Does the applicant and does the project meet the requirements? We're going to be checking for feasibility. Is your project realistic? Is your budget realistic for your project? Do we think there's a high probability of success? Are you ready? Does it show a full and complete plan? that seems really actionable and well thought out? Are the permits and the landowner permissions already in place or in the process of being secured? Do you have a plan to get all of those things? And does the project meet some of the basic compliance requirements for the RTP program? So those federal requirements. That's what we're going to be checking for. And applications that meet the eligibility, feasibility, readiness, and compliance, those pre-applications, those applicants are going to be invited to then go on and submit a full application. And so we'll be reaching out to everyone who submits a pre-application in January to let you know whether or not you've been invited to that full step. And so some tips and tricks now, digging into the heart of the pre-application of what does this mean? We're going to start with the work plan as that first attachment. And so your work plan, we've provided you a template. You can download it from our website. This is the space to tell us, what are you doing? Who will do it? What will accomplish? And when is it going to happen? That's really the pieces that we need to know. And so as you're thinking through building out your work plan, what we want you to do is to separate activities that require different people, materials, equipment, or timelines. So if there are, two pieces of trail maintenance, and this one piece you're going to be working with, say, the VYCC to do that, and this other piece we're going to be contracting an arborist for that. Like, split those out into separate activities in your work plan because it's different people happening at different times and different needs. And as you're thinking through your work plan, some of the potential activities that you might consider including, do you have any surveying, design, or engineering that's going to happen as a part of your project? Remember, you can include this so long as it's part of that bigger implementation. It just can't be only the surveying, design, and engineering. What is the permitting that you need to go through in terms of that plan that your whole first year can be given to permitting and other compliance requirements? Do you have timelines for bids, quotes, final budgets? Because you're submitting a proposal now for work that starts in October. We don't actually expect you to have a contractor ready to go as soon as October 1st rolls around. That we expect that to be a part of your work plan, that you would need to, get those updated bids, those updated numbers, and to make your final determinations. There's going to be multiple, whatever your construction phases or maintenance phases are for this. And then, there might be things like site visits or events that you might want to include as a part of this. We have provided a template. There's a simple chart in that template and things to keep in mind. Try to make it clear and concise. So short and sweet, but to tell your story and what's going on. So just to make it easy to read, you don't have to fill a lot of words in there if you can sum it up in just a sentence. And depending on how you build your plan mentally, so I know sometimes we can be lumpers or splitters in terms of plan. You're like, all of these things is one activity. That's great. If that's how you can do it and you want to itemize it out that way, that's fine. But if you're saying, well, this is this step and this is this step, and you really like to split things out for your own conceptual development, any major activities should have a deliverable attached to them, something that you're accomplishing as a part of that. But if you are one of those folks who likes to split it into all the tiny steps, it is okay for not every line item to have a deliverable attached to it. And if you have multiple trails or multiple major sections of trail that's a part of this project, we know sometimes with RTP projects, it is very focused on just this one area. This is where we're working. Other ones are saying, well, we're going to do 4 sections of our whole trail, or we work statewide, and these are the areas or the types of projects we want to prioritize within our grants. And so if you do have multiple major sections, the chart that we've given you in that work plan template, please just copy and paste it down and give us like one block for each chunk of trail to do. And if you're sitting there thinking to yourself, she said this word deliverables a couple times. What on earth is FPR talking about? We've provided examples in the pre-application guidance about this, but when we're thinking about the deliverables, it's like, what is the result of the work? What can you measure that's going to be something that we can say, yeah, you did it. This is what success looks like. And so example deliverables could be like, well, we're going to say make X number of miles of newly universally accessible trails. We're going to say X miles of trails are going to be maintained. X number of culverts are going to be installed. X number of bridges. X number of people reached via educational programs. Y number of trail signs installed. How many miles of snow trails are going to be groomed. So just think about those kind of pieces to say, yeah, this is a way that we can define success and that we did the project as planned. And so we were asking you to think about that and include those in your work plan. The next document we're asking you to submit during the pre-application phase is your budget. And so for your budget, please be thorough, detailed, and accurate. Let this be your best guess of what the costs are going to be for your project and truly your best estimates. If you don't already have a concept in mind, we're not just trying to say like, I think a new bridge should cost $30,000. Don't make up numbers in that way. If you have something in mind that you're anticipating needing contractors or needing somebody to come in and do that work, seek quotes now. Like reach out to folks who do this work and try to get multiple quotes to get an estimate of a realistic estimate of what that cost will be. And then plan for inflation. We are recommending you do that in this project. So you could say, yeah, well, my average cost that I got back for this work component was $25,000. I want to budget more than that. I'm going to budget an extra 5% because we anticipate, even here in Vermont over the last couple of years, construction prices have fluctuated wildly in terms of the materials, the labor, all of those pieces. And so we want you to plan in your budgets to be able to have a plan for a little bit of growth for that cost based on what you know now. But do make it your best guess for now. And make sure it really includes everything that you plan to put in the project. I did just want to touch on a common piece that comes up with the RTP grants, which is, should I use our staff to do this or should we hire a contractor? And the answer is you could do both, but they are different in terms of the amount of reporting and work there is. It is much easier to document hiring a contractor to do this, that you can say, yes, we put out our quotes for bids. Here are the 3 bids that we got back. We went with this contractor and here is why. And then we can submit just the invoices from the contractor at the end and the payment records. Like for the documentation purposes, that's there. If you do choose to use staff time, just know that you're going to have to do a little bit more internal administrative support. There are things that we generally need to see or have on records, things like staff time reports. So that's not just saying, hey, I worked 30 hours this week, but it's I worked 30 hours on this project. It needs to be able to be pulled out to that project level and to be able to pull. We often need things like pay stubs and other like kind of information like that. And so you can do both. It's just to sort of prepare in terms of your administrative load. If you're using staff time versus contractor time, you might see a little bit of a difference there. Next thing for budget is the match, right? So I mentioned at the beginning that this is a reimbursement grant and it does require a match. So the match for the RTP grants, it does require a 20% of the total project. So that's not 20% of what you're requesting, 20% of the total cost of the project is what you are required to provide. But that match doesn't always have to be cash. It can be cash, if you have your town, your nonprofit, your governmental entity is saying, yeah, well, we're going to pay this much into it. We've got that funding, we have another grant, something like that. That could be a part of it. But your match could also be like in kind or a soft match is what it's sometimes called. That can be things that are not covered by RTP funds that you are contributing, things like staff labor that's not covered by RTP funds. That could be things like volunteer time for folks who are investing effort. It could be donations of tools or supplies. And so you will be required in our budget template. We have like, well, what are the things that you're spending money on? And then is it something you're requesting from the RTP program, or is it match? And then we have you lump together your match. And this is an RTP requirement. It's not because we want to make you fill out more boxes. It's something we actually have to report on, of like what percentage of your match is from federal, state, local, or private resources. So that's something that we have to report, which is why you're going to see it in there. And so we've tried to make the template as easy as possible to use. The template is actually, the budget template is actually set up. There's directions in it. It says, enter your information in these fields, and then it will do the math for you. So it will actually help you out and do the math that way. So you can check your balances, and we've even said this cell and this cell should match. So check for that. So we've built that into the spreadsheet, and so be sure to check that out as you dig in. You might be wondering what exactly it is you can ask for money for. And so one of the requests that we heard from the RTP working group was additional clarity around what are the eligible expenses. So the pre-application guidance document includes a lot of additional examples, but on the whole, things that you can look for are and include are your engineering, design, permitting, and any type of compliance checks. So we're going to touch on what they call ARAs, the archaeological resource assessments, but that would be an eligible cost to include in your grant for RTP funds. Project administration is an allowable cost. So project administration is allowed. Construction, design, surveying, engineering, any type of construction contracting that's a part of that. Any labor that you have is an allowable cost with RTP grants. Tools, materials, supplies, equipment rentals, publication, research and design fees, and acquisition costs. So as I said, if you want to know more about all of these things, check out that application, the pre-application guidance that's available on the website, because it teases things out a little bit more. Because you might be thinking, well, labor could include things like contractors, staff salaries, costs for youth conservation corps, youth conservation crews. All of those pieces could be there. So we've got that kind of called out there. And I think I just saw something come up in the chat briefly of like, is there a recommended volunteer rate? And so we do have a recommended volunteer rate that is posted as part of that guidance. So we have one that's there. If you have a different volunteer rate, you can use that, but we do have one that we've offered. And so now I'm going to go through the things that aren't eligible with RTP grants in terms of that budget. Really, we went through that whole list of ineligible activities. Any costs associated with those you cannot apply for. If it's an ineligible activity, you can't use it in terms of the RTP budgets. Lodging and food is one that's a little bit sneakier. It's one that people often don't think about, but it is not a permissible use for the RTP budgets. Any expenses made prior to signing the grant agreement. RTP is a reimbursement program, but it doesn't reimburse in general what we call pre-award costs. So costs that you've done now, with the exception of the ARAs. So we can do those at a certain stage within the process. So you can't get started now, but we will provide more information to folks who are selected, but that would be one of the few exceptions to a pre-award reimbursement. The other pieces that we can't reimburse are any expenses that don't meet state procurement requirements. So with that, this is all going to be spelled out in any type of grant agreement. So we'll have additional information in the full application guidance, but we need to show as an investment of state and really federal funds that we're following proper financial procedures. And so things like that could fall into that category would be things like awarding a contract without getting multiple bids. If you award a contract without multiple bids, unfortunately, that's not something that's generally reimbursable. Things where you made a purchase but don't have any type of documentation is something that we can't unfortunately reimburse. So we do need that appropriate documentation. And then the last bucket of category of things that do actually come up with grantees that are ineligible expenses are things that go beyond the scope of work that was originally proposed. So if you said, yeah, well, we wanted to do kiosks and trail signs and maintenance, like that's what we're putting into our proposal. And you're like, and also we decided to add benches. Like if benches weren't in your grant agreement, then we can't include those. That's kind of the pieces, like make sure your project, your budget, everything that you would need to include is included in that grant, that pre-application budget. And I'm seeing some pieces here about some of the pieces that are going to come up later in the webinar. So we can come back to some of those pieces in the chat around design and permitting. Because there is a question I did want to touch on, like as we're moving into like permitting and permissions here away from budget, is around landowner permissions. And so with landowner permissions, we are going to require that you have landowner permission by the time you submit your full application. And they're only needed for any project where the applicant doesn't own the land 100% in full. And so if your township owns 100% of the land where the project is happening and the town is applying, great, you don't need landowner permission. You are the landowner. We don't need any kind of documentation for that. But if any portion of your project is happening on land that is owned by another entity, we will have a permission form that's when it comes time to the full application that you will be able to go ahead and submit. And there are some different timelines with that. You know, for example, if your project is just grooming snow, you need a 1-year landowner permission agreement. If you have something that's more of a general maintenance activity, things like adding kiosks, small assets, that's a 5-year commitment. New trail construction or major trail infrastructure, we're looking at 10 years, and anything that is like a permanent facility or structure, things like restrooms, bridges, pavilions, that requires a 25-year commitment from the landowners. And so you don't need this at the pre-application stage. But there is a question in the online form that says, do you own the land? Yes or no? And if you say no, it says, there's a couple of questions that are saying, do you already have your permission? If not, what's your plan for getting it? So you're going to have that piece there, but know that by the time we get a full application, you are going to need that. So it's good to start those conversations now. Because permitting and permission are kind of the two sides right there. And so I've been seeing a couple questions come up in the chat around permitting for different ways. And so permitting, any projects that are funded through the RTP program are going to have to follow state and federal requirements. And so here in Vermont, one of the easiest ways to do that is, and to start that process, is something that is offered through the Department of Environmental Conservation. It's called Permit Navigator. And so you can go through the Permit Navigator site, and we have the link on our website. And it's a tool that's going to help you identify which permits are there in both Act 250 and various agency of natural resources permit requirements. And so you can go through this tool as a guest. You don't have to give it all your information now. You can if you're ready to move forward with that, but you can go through as a guest. And at the very end, you'll get something that you can print out or download. It's a PDF of your results. And that's what we're going to be asking for at this pre-application stage, is that just that Permit Navigator results. And so during that process, we have detailed directions in the pre-application guidance. During that process, there's actually a couple of different checkboxes in the Permit Navigator tool where it will ask you if you want an Act 250 jurisdictional opinion. It means if you want them to actually take your Permit Navigator application and give it to the Department of Environmental Conservation staff to start reviewing for Act 250 permits. And so with that, if you do not want that now, don't click the box. It comes up a couple times. You don't have to do that at this stage in the pre-application. That being said, you will need to have permits in place before any construction can start. So you are allowed to begin the permit process as soon as you are ready. But remember, you cannot use RTP funds to cover any permit requirements until after the grant agreement has been signed. You can use, if you start now and are doing permitting stuff, you can use that towards your match. Any type of permitting pieces you can use towards your match, but you can't use RTP grant funds now. And so I've been seeing some things come up in the chat around, you mentioned the universal accessibility or the historical preservation requirements. And so I want to touch on those because all applications or all grant projects will need to follow state and federal compliance. And really those fall right now into 4 big buckets. And we're going to have more information about this in the full application guidance, which are actually hoping to get up within the next couple of weeks, so that you'll be able to see it before the deadline. But we want to be able to share that. But things that you'll need to know for compliance. There are fiscal compliance requirements. So these are some things like the certificate of good standing for the state. We have our business office has a risk assessment questionnaire that we'll need a certificate of insurance, W-9s, procurement stuff. All of this is for when you get to your grant agreement phase. This is not for now. This is just to know that this is a part of the process if you apply for an RTP grant. You don't have to give us any of this now. Please do not send me a certificate of insurance now. Please do not do that. We don't need it now. But that'll be a later thing. The next bucket of compliance pieces, there's several different environmental compliance pieces in order to support the National Environmental Protection Act. We have our state permits. There are potential impacts for northern long-eared bats, for endangered species compliance, and FPR staff actually will help as best we can get you through that process in terms of like navigating what you need to do and where you can find it. But the permit navigator tool helps to flag all of the permits you need. And for us, that's actually really helpful because they say, yeah, we can read through and say, well, you need this permit and probably this permit and maybe that one. And we can tell that in your permit navigator report. And that's one of those kind of feasibility checks versus we have also seen in the past permit navigator reports that flip about 20 to 25 different permits. And if we see that coming in, it's going to raise a flag for us of like, is your project actually feasible? Because that's a lot of permits. That's a lot of pieces that you might need. And in general, we don't see that happen in the trails, applications, but it's just something to consider and that your permit navigator reports will help flag that to begin that process. RTP at the national level has requirements around universal accessibility unless you meet one of the designated exceptions. And saying, but I'm building on a mountain like this is an exception. It is one of the categories that you can do. And we actually have all of those exceptions already outlined. It's at the very end of the pre-application guidance. So please read that document through the end and you'll be able to see that. But if you're building, say, like a trail in your town park and you don't have a reason that you shouldn't be doing that, just go ahead and build that into your design plan. Knows that it's going to have to be universally accessible if it's going to support RTP funds. And then the last piece that is there, it's a historical preservation compliance piece. It's related to Section 106 of the Historical Preservation Act. And that is really just a check about potential impacts on historical human resources. And so there is a process with that, we have some questions built into the full application to help assess for that. But I've been seeing some questions come in the chat right now. So I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit more about how that works. And so during our full application, we're going to ask you questions more about what you're doing in much more detail than we're asking with this kind of additional work plan. Some additional checkboxes, some other pieces that are really like, are you working exclusively within the same footprint of an existing disturbed area, or are you going more than 5 feet beyond an existing disturbed area? So if you're saying, but I'm only maintaining the trail in the trail where the trail is, you would click no. We have some questions like that built in. And so after applications have been selected, what we do is, internally is we actually have a teammate who helps to review these, who looks them up, and then we submit the projects to the Department of Historical Preservation here in Vermont. And they actually go through the projects that are there and say, this one seems like it's not going to have any kind of pieces. It's going to be in Section 106 compliance. It's going to be fine. They'll give you they'll give that project that letter of approval that way. Then there are projects where they might say, there are questions. We don't know what's here. We don't know what the answer is, but there's the potential that this could impact something. And so sometimes one of the next steps, they do desk reviews. Sometimes one of the next steps is contracting a consultant to do what they call an archaeological resource assessment, or ARA. And then that takes a few months, which is, again, why we have that 2-year timeline. And so we're going to be trying to identify through even as early as the application phases, which projects probably might need an ARA, and to be able to help those applicants move through the timeline, and to build that into their plans. And again, that's an RTP funded piece. And so really all of these things are to help you be successful while still protecting the amazing resources we have here in Vermont. And so we have built the timeline to be able to hopefully accommodate for these pieces, but know that they are steps that have to be included because this is a federal fund. And so I've gone through a lot really quickly. And if you like to see these things in written format, we do have a lot of this in a pre-application guidance that's available on our website. And here's the link to our website right there. We're also going to be posting additional resources, including the recording of this webinar, and other pieces as we develop them and fully finalize them. We'll continue to add that to our website. We're also going to have an opportunity in just over a week for an open office hours. I know we're already 45 minutes in of me talking to you. You probably came to this meeting with a lot of questions. We're going to open up here in just a minute and answer as many as we can, but we want to hold space for conversations next Wednesday, December 13th at 3 o'clock for your other questions if you would like to hop on live, because unfortunately we don't have the staff capacity to meet with every single pre-application, any person who's interested in that one-to-one as a starting point. So we have these office hours as a space to come and have conversations. If that schedule doesn't work, or if your question is more time sensitive, please email us. We're asking you the email as our first line of conversation, and we've been trying to get back to those pretty quickly for this grant or any other grants. And so you can email us at anr.fprrecreationgrants. There's only one R in there. I'm just seeing a typo. anr.fprrecreationgrants. Not recreation, at vermont.gov. And so that is probably the email actually where you got a notice of this webinar today. So that'll be the piece. And so now for our last 15 minutes together, or 13 minutes, we wanted to open it up for some Q&A. And so I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen now. And before I just open it up in general, Claire, are there any questions in the chat that haven't gotten addressed yet?
Yes, there are. The first one that I couldn't address in the short period of a chat is, what if actual project costs exceed the budget submission in the application?
That's a great question. Part of one of our pieces that we're going to be doing is trying to help applicants make that plan in the final grant proposal, so that the budget is as accurate as possible. So if you submit a pre-application, you are actually going to have the chance to revise your budget, your work plan, the other pieces prior to full submission. In fact, if you're invited to move to that next phase, we anticipate offering some feedback. Please address the feedback that we've given you. So like our staff team might look at it and go, okay, we see what you've included there. We might suggest you reevaluate this budget line, or maybe that as you said, if we look at something and we go, we think you're going to probably need an ARA just based on this first piece. So go ahead and add it to your budget now. And so we're going to have some conversation around that for folks who are invited to submit a full application. So like that's this first piece is like, this right now is not what you're beholden to for the next 2 years. You will have a chance to revise. That being said, it should be your best guess as of right now. Because if you say, well, I submitted my pre-application and now my final proposal is totally different, that could actually potentially disqualify you if it is totally different. So it does need to be your best guess along the way. That being said, we know that costs change. We do want you to try to have that best estimate, but our RTP grants, for us, we're making that allocation based on what our federal funding designation is. So if your project ends up costing well above and beyond your initial budget, that's going to be something that you'll have to find alternate funds to cover. It's not something that RTP funds can say, oh, well, we'll just give you an extra 10 grand because it costs more. Like we cannot do that. The amount of funding that you are awarded is what you are awarded for RTP. Claire, do you have anything you'd like to add for that?
No, but okay, yes, I do have things to add. It's that within each budget line, we have a 10% flexibility in your reimbursement that if things like change around within 10%, that's fine. If it changes more than that, we would need to do a grant agreement amendment. And then thirdly, as Lauren said, we can never raise the amount of money we distribute through the grant agreement because that amount is like federally authorized. If you complete the project with using less money than you intended, you can do that, but you just can't go over.
Thanks, Claire. And if I can add just a little bit, because it's been coming in through emails a couple of times. So when Claire says that 10% line, that's to say, like, say you made your budget line for tools $1,000, and you actually had to spend like $1,050. That is within the 10%. And so that's fine. You can just take that $50 out of another budget line versus to say, well, I budgeted $1,000 for tools. It really cost me $2,000. Like that is far more than that 10%. And so we need to adjust for it then. So it's per budget line.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. Yeah. And so Claire, were there any other questions in the chat?
Yeah, one more question. Kasha asked a few questions that I just answered, but her last question is, what documentation is required for using staff time as a match? And I didn't answer that one because it's long.
Yeah, so for using staff time as a match, we really do generally require the same types of documentation as you would if you were requesting staff time. And so we really need to see that. And so it needs to be the proof of hours worked. In terms of like staff time reports, I spent 5 hours on the project this day doing this. I spent 10 hours on the project doing that day, doing that. I spent 2 hours here. So it's kind of that staff time report. It is the overall staff pay proof is generally a piece. And then there's one more piece, Claire. I've temporarily blanked out. What's that third piece?
Pay stubs.
Pay stubs. There we go. Yeah. So we need to be able to see that, like the overall time report.
So this question was specifically about the match. And so
sorry.
So you should be able to show us that if we request it. So you're not required to demonstrate what Lauren just said for your reimbursement request. Your reimbursement request should be focused only on what we are actually reimbursing. But if we were to audit you, which is under all of our grant agreements, our right to do as the provider of the funds, you should be able to show us and demonstrate that that match occurred. And so you should be tracking your match in a similar way as what you are tracking your reimbursable expense. We have another question in the chat. What if the project cost is $110,000 and we are applying for other grants and fundraising to cover the other $60,000? Do we break the project down and apply for $50,000 for a specific part of the project, or can $50,000 go towards the overall project?
Yeah, so within the budget template, you will see sections to request specific chunks of funds. So we can't just say it's $50,000 for the trail project out of this whole piece. So the way it actually works is like our eligible expenses are in our rows, and then we have a column for how much of that is RTP funds and how much of that is other funds, your match funds. So if you have almost 50% match, that's also totally okay. More than 20% match is always okay. So you could always show that, but we do have it that column broken down by RTP and not. And based on some of the past grants that I've seen come in, I would actually recommend that you pick and choose the lines that you think are going to be maybe some of the most stable, and say RTP funds are going to cover that, and maybe some of these other ones that are maybe have some more chances for fluctuation, that's where our match funds are going to be, and put it there. Because we've seen that happen before where like, well, I'm going to take it and say, if it's we're using RTP funds for 80% of our costs, right? Total cost. And they're like, well, I'm just going to make each line item be 80%. And then my match is 20% of every line item. That way, if something shifts a lot, we talked about needing to amend grant agreements, then we have to do that. Versus if you just say, we know that we need $20,000 worth of stone. We're going to take that from the RTP funds and some of those other fluctuating pieces. We're going to use our other funds for that, because there could be some greater variation in that. So I suggest splitting it out that way, but you do have to be able to separate that in your budget report or budget template.
Great. Shelly has a question, and Shelly, you might have to unmute yourself and help me with this because I'm not totally sure what your question is. She says, in Permit Navigator, which radio button are we clicking for trail tread improvement on existing trails? Hopefully using VYCC. Not sure what you mean by radio button.
Well, it would be a button that you click with your mouse. And if you go into Permit Navigator, there's nothing about recreation or trails. So any insight there, if nobody's been into Permit Navigator yet, hang on to your hat.
It is a lot. And with a lot of the Permit Navigator pieces, it'll come up later. Like I have been through there actually as a guest user. So I've been through the whole piece as a guest user. And so it starts with some of the pieces about like, what's your location? Where are you? If you're closer to an urban area versus it'll actually populate the questions based on where on the map you've picked. Because if you're picking a really rural area, it'll actually pull up different pieces than say, like I ran an example close to our state office in Montpelier in National Life. And there are a lot more questions when you do it that way if you're closer to an urban area. So it does populate it that way. And so it's not necessarily like one selection button. You say, this is where I'm doing trails. It'll basically say like, are you doing wastewater treatment? Yes or no? And so you do have to go through the whole process to find it. I don't remember a specific piece where it was saying, your overall project type that would flow that way.
Don't click on other.
Yeah, it'll ask you a lot of open-ended questions. That is one piece, and we have included that in the pre-application guidance, is the more specific you can be in your Permit Navigator when you sit down to do that, the better your results will be. Because if you click, I don't know, your responses will be, go look it up later. You might need this permit. So if you want to narrow your window as best you can, do try to build that information and get as much of it as you can.
And just to repeat also, what this is doing is helping you narrow down which permits you might need. It isn't actually applying for the permits. And so we are requiring you to do this step, but before actually implementing the project, you will need to do that next step, which is actually getting the permits and contacting the DEC specialists that are listed on the Permit Navigator results sheet. There was some confusion last year thinking that this was Permit Navigator was giving you the actual permits, and it is not. This is just the second year with Permit Navigator, and they are making improvements. And so we can provide feedback to our colleagues over at DEC as well. And so like we are happy to hear like if you find some things that are problematic, just give us send us an email and we'll try and help you figure that out.
I see one coming into the chat here about the pre-application, and can you save it? No, and yes, all at the same time. So if you remember, the pre-application is two parts. One is the online form. Once you start the online form, there's not a way to go back and revise it, but the online form is pretty like your name, your email, the organization that's applying, and some of those big picture things. It's meant to be pretty short and sweet. So like if you've done all the rest, that should be really fast. You know, it will ask you for your budget. So if you haven't done your budget sheet yet, I might hold off on the online form, but you don't have a way to go back and edit. But if you realize like, oh, I entered the wrong name or I need to update it later, you can actually just go fill out the form again and just tell it, like send us the email to say, you know, we realized we had an error, please see the second entry or something like that. So you can't save it and go back, but it's pretty short that way. For the work plan, the budget, and the permit navigator pieces, you know, permit navigator, it's I don't actually remember if you can save your progress along the way. If you're doing it as a guest, I don't believe you can. I think it's a one shot, but you can do it over again as many times as you need to. We just need the final PDF. For the work plan and the budget template, those are downloadable like documents. If you use Microsoft, you can use that in Word and Excel. If you're a Google user or have alternate systems, generally you can open those file types in whatever your system is. We just need to ultimately get back either like a Word or Excel version of those, or even a PDF we could work with, and you will send those via email when you're finished. So you can save those as many times because we can't see it until you send it back to us. And I think we're at the top of our time here. And so we will be posting this recording later. We know that we probably didn't get to everybody's questions today. So please, we encourage you to email us if you have additional questions. So please send us an email and to share your questions. We'll be doing that, or you can hop on live with us in just over a week for our next open office hours. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for your interest in the RTP program, and we'll look forward to answering your questions and going forward from here. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, and just really quickly, John, could you send us that question about your town and town forest in email, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. It's just hard to transfer from this to email. So just send us an email at anr.fprrecreationgrants@vermont.gov. Because it's a little more complicated than we can just answer quickly right now.